Welcome to another episode of the podcast. It's always great to have Chris Korfist and Dan Fichter on the show. Their first appearance together on this podcast series was on episode 38, and they've been no strangers along the line. Absolutely love talking to these two individuals. Back on 38, they talked about the DB Hammer system and how the nuances of that system, such as auto-regulation and drop-offs, had worked its way into their programming, and we'll be following up on that original conversation, talking a lot about speed training complexes and how Chris and Dan have infused ideas of motor learning, coordination, and neurological adaptation into that approach. It was awesome having these two back on the show, and I'm excited to get to the episode here. Dan, Chris, great to have you guys back on the show. Chris, I was actually reading, I forget where you posted this. It might have been the Track Football Consortium, but it was about your education and like all the travel that you and Dan had spent. And Dan, I know you went out to see like Douglas Heel on a whim back in the day. Like you guys have spent so much time learning and traveling. I was going to ask you for the first, I guess you could call it question, but any memories of like a huge trip that you took to go and learn from somebody, or a big jump that you made to go learn a new system of thought? Any stories or anecdotes there you want to share?
I think go ahead, Dan.
No, you go. Go ahead.
You jumped in.
No, I didn't.
I think when I started doing that, I was a pretty young coach, and a friend of mine was a chiropractor, Phil Clausen, who said, maybe you should go see other people, because, I've done, the Husker Power program and all that. And so he gave me a Powerlifting USA magazine. He goes, go into the back of the classifieds and look up Westside Barbell. And, Louis Simmons had a column every month in there. And so I called him up, and I said, I think that was the first time that I actually left to go somewhere to see someone. And so I drove out there, and I think I was there for 4 days. I was there with the University of Washington football coach and someone else. And, you just see stuff and you see how things go compared to what you read in the article and what you've heard. You're actually there and you see things firsthand. And then someone like Louis, who was so generous with his time, his, everything, answering questions, so on and so forth. And that's what really kind of started that. All right, here's someone doing something different. Maybe what everyone else is doing isn't the best way to do things. And he had, all the Russian research, which I bought and read, super training. And that kind of started this path where, there's other ways of doing things, because what I'm doing wasn't working or at least not getting to where I needed to go. And that's really where it started was, another, a mentor of mine when I was a very young coach said, you need to go start seeing people.
I think that's part of the whole thing about Chris and I is the places we've been and the people we've talked to and learned from. And when you see some of our work, you'll see bits and pieces of everybody in that work and how we each translate. I mean, we would even interpret someone who taught us differently, the way Chris does it to the way I do it. But I think that part of the lineage of how you learned and what you learned is so critical to the field of strength and conditioning. And being a high school football coach, I do it all the time. When a college recruiter comes in, I always ask, what's your coaching tree and who'd you coach with? And because the same thing happens in strength and conditioning, speed work and everything. You're either a Charlie Francis disciple or you've have studied Westside Barbell. All these things come together and they connect along the way. And I think when you get to be my age and Chris's age, you've had an opportunity to experience a lot of different systems, and it's kind of neat. Like looking back on it now, it's pretty cool. I mean, we both.
And I think when we started, the access to information was not nearly what it is today. So you actually had to call people. He had to write letters. There was no, internet, email wasn't a thing. Nobody was posting things. And that's kind of how Dan and I met. There was the Super Training message board that we started, throwing into, and realized that we had a lot of similar situations where we're high school coaches who are trying to do better. And that's kind of how we met.
Yeah. It's interesting to think too about how coaches and even athletes, when you're an athlete yourself and trying things out, the process, whatever it was like 20 or 30 or 40 years ago, excuse me, versus how it is now. Just because I think back then it was a lot more. You had to do a lot of research. You had to go on a journey to find some information. And then once you went on that journey, it wasn't necessarily easy to just find whatever you wanted. So you had to really work with whatever it was. I think it was good for developing intuition in a way. And maybe in a similar way, I was just watching a music video. I think it was Rick Beato. Beato is his last name.
Yeah.
It was like why music isn't good anymore. And it was a lot of it was just everything's available, all the auto tune and all the mixing and the drum machines. And he talks about like part of that might be a little bit of time saving necessity, but it's gotten so much to the point where he's like, what happened to just messing around with chords till you find something that sounds good, And I think there's a lot of inroads for exercise and physical training there.
And I think that's a big thing now is that today people just accumulate knowledge, or not so much knowledge, but information. They read it once and they store it somewhere. But back in the day, things took time. And so you had time to actually work through things because you may only get one article a month or something like that. And if that's all you're getting. And so go ahead and work through that and try things and experiment. But today you can just go download 20 podcasts, look at 3 Instagram posts, YouTube, and think you're an expert all of a sudden. And there's been no time to let things stew, to let things grow inside your own head, and to take your own look at things and create your own system.
Yeah, I was just having a conversation with Tommy John, or son of the Tommy John with the first Tommy John surgery, and training with Tommy, who I know he got a lot of his ideas and inspiration from Jay Schrader, and a lot of the exercises were very repetitive. And Tommy would do like walking, like 3-way shoulders with light dumbbells for like 10, 15, 20 minutes, like long durations. But the goal that he had said his dad did that with like, he just strapped on like wrist weights or something and did that for like 30, 40 minutes. And it just felt good versus I think it would be rare. It would be much more difficult to arrive at something like that by feel now, because there's just so many. It's like, oh, I want to learn how to train. Well, I'll just watch like, 20 videos and they all have these exercises versus sitting with something for an extended period of time. And I think like with the spirit of some of the things in the Jay Schrader system, just sitting with things with time, I think there's a lot of value in that. It's a very like internal practice versus everything now. I think it's very easy to be like just a lot of outer practices, a lot of external things with maybe less connections drawn between.
And then you talk about how you get there and how you truly learn something is actually like what Mel taught me when I went out to see Mel Siff, and he said to me, you like explosive training, right? I'm like, yeah. He goes, all right, you're going to go over on this side of the library. You're going to start reading about aerobic training. I'm like, I don't want to do that. He's like, no, you need to understand why you like something and why you dislike something and be able to prove it. And he really hit home the whole philosophical thing of you need to understand this stuff from the inside out. And, those FaceTime meetings, and I say FaceTime, it really isn't FaceTime. It's being in front of somebody and having those interactions with real coaches in the trenches, like with Chris, with Louis, and I did it with Louis also, and Mel. Those things are invaluable in terms of just regardless of your philosophy. I mean, and that's where I'm at now is with all the coaches that I'll talk to whenever we're consulting, I'm like, I don't care what your belief system is, because somewhere along the way it worked. It's just we have to figure out ways to make it keep working. And it takes connecting of the dots is what I call it. You have to be able to connect dots, the movement dots. And, there's been a lot of great people who are kind of meeting and you're going, wow, they were all right. It's just we interpreted it wrong for a little bit. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And that's always another thing is how people interpret that work and what they get out of it. And what they create from their own interpretation of that work.
Yeah, that's where Dan, I was going to ask you this question. Chris, I know you wrote about this in like you used to do like the tempo work and the track, like the standard stuff. And I feel like that's a way that it's not like, I think you can't just say it. I don't do the 8x200 or whatever because, well, I just don't do it. It's just, it's like, no, I did that. And then I went through it and I understand it and how athletes adapt. And now I moved on to this system. And so it's kind of like you understood the opposite because you were there. And I was going to ask, and Dan, I'm glad you mentioned that. I was going to ask, Chris, you mentioned like Husker power. Dan, I was going to ask a little about where you were before, like, I guess maybe the like DB Hammer, even Jay Schrader years. Like, what were you
I
up
was
to
big
before
Charlie
that?
Francis and Brent McFarlane, right? So I had an opportunity to talk to both those guys. And to be honest, it was probably, I don't know, it was just reading every magazine, every powerlifting magazine, similar to Chris, and understanding that there was something more out there. So yeah, we've had an opportunity to meet some great people. I mean, Charlie Francis, we got even guys like John Pryor now, who had with his Franz Bosch experience, being able to talk to those guys live or in front of the camera with them has been fantastic because it's a completely different philosophy, but you're still connecting dots back to your fundamental philosophy. So I would say Louis Simmons and Charlie Francis.
Yeah, I was just even before it was not just like this last week or before we were doing this podcast or locked in for this podcast, but I was just going through the old Charlie Francis training system book in my library on my desktop, and I was going through it just because like the recovery protocols, because I have a sauna in my backyard. I'm like, what did Charlie have to say about this sauna? And he had like all the individual recovery protocols lined out for everybody. I was like, there's so much phenomenal stuff in the past, and I think sometimes we forget it. Like there's these really, really good books, especially from like the 80s and 90s. And, clearly you guys eventually evolved your system, but I still think that a lot of coaches could really value or benefit from some of that work. And like Gilly's Cometti and like the complex training type stuff that he was coming up with. Even I was going to, and I eventually will get to and I screenshotted a couple of the setups to my desk, like the How to Get Fast Volume 1, like the complexes you guys did, because I was like, oh, these are awesome, And just thinking about how those complexes run relative to and the spirit of some of the stuff that Gillis was up to, and the Werner Gunther training and all that. So I think there's just so much good stuff there
and it's good because it comes full circle, because that's what Cal's doing with his performance cycling now, right? So it's all, everything comes back to basically the same thing. If you were there in the beginning and understood how it's evolved and how it's changed, and it's kind of just a neat process.
Yeah, with the performance cycling too, maybe I'll skip ahead just slightly. Well, maybe let me just check the first question I had, because I was going to move on to a little bit of the complex of want to get the DB Hammer stuff, the How to Get Fast Volume 1. With the editing, I was mentioning too, and I said this before, I love the old school editing in that video. And the music is amazing. It's true classic.
It was all me. Yeah. That's me learning how to do, God, I don't even remember what the software was, but to make that, we said, let's make a video. I'll come out to New York. We wasted the entire first day and a half trying to figure out or think about how we're going to memorize what we wanted to say. Dan took a projector from his school, and we were projecting things up onto the wall for a while. And then after a while, he said, let's just do a whiteboard thing. And so we fumbled around for quite a bit before we actually found our groove to start filming stuff, which was, it was frustrating. Those were 14, 16-hour days. Like, this didn't work. Well, this didn't work. Well, let's try this. All right, finally, we got it. Let's just do what we do. Let's get in front of it. Let's get in the classroom and start shooting the stuff.
And that's when it changed. When we got in that's home for us. Get in front of people and just talk.
Yeah, with some of those series, like those complexes, that's one of the things I wanted to get to. And so I know you guys get heavily into, I think it was podcast 32 or 36. It was in the 30s. That was like 7 years ago, because I started this podcast when my daughter was born, or around about that time, and she's almost 8. So it was over 7 years ago. It's crazy how long ago. And on that original podcast, I think I spent like 6 minutes before the show started explaining the DB. I can't believe I spent that long explaining stuff before we even started rolling, explaining the drop offs and the magnitude and duration and the speed brackets. But with and maybe we can just do a brief summary of that too. I don't know if is there like a 1 minute version of that? I don't know. But I was looking through like the workouts, the complexes you guys came up with, and it does remind me a little bit of Cal's performance cycling. This workout 6 here. It's like squat drops, split squat drops, stiff leg drops, fly tens, prime times, line hops. And it's funny because I had never even thought about a 6 component movement. And then, Cal had performance cycling and there's more things in there. I hadn't really considered these giant sets of work. So that's kind of funny. It's probably memory lane as I read those.
Cal's performance cycling now is 32 steps.
Yeah.
Cal's performance cycling is now an entire one after another. I think some of his workouts, there's 32 steps to get through. You go by the colors. He's got everything color coded, and you just follow your colors for the day. You may even go to another building for part of your cycling. He sometimes takes over the basketball stadium, so he has longer hallways to run in.
Oh, wow. I will definitely have to take a look at that. It reminds me of I guess a mixing board, and you have all the colors of the instruments coming in.
Yeah, that's basically what that's become.
Yeah.
So anyway, your question was?
Oh, yeah. Sorry. I should ask you an official question. And, I think I will. I'll probably try to do my own, I guess, 1 or 2 minute version. I will say, whoever's listening to this, I hope they've listened to the original podcast we did back 7 years ago.
You wanted a 1 minute DV?
Yeah. Maybe we could start with that because, I'd rather you give the synopsis than me, to be honest. I think it'd be a little more clear here, and they'll flow right into a little bit with the circuits.
So DB Hammer was a guy who I think Dan and I gravitated toward him because he tried to get to more of a neurological aspect of training, that everything wasn't the same, that there were speeds of movements, even bars leaving your hands, and then that was all controlled by autoregulation. So for us, that you could easily with the team individualize workouts very quickly. And I think there is a way in the book, I know there is a way in the book that you could figure out what kind of athlete that you had so you could build an athlete for that individual. Because I think we've all been through workouts where we go, all right, I did this awesome macro, micro, mesocycle chart, and I have all of my percentages completely planned out for every person for every day for the next 6 weeks. And only about a third of the people got better. So I think for us, that was something that we could individualize for our teams or even for ourselves and for our athletes.
Yeah. I think the big thing that stood out to me was you had the bucketing too. You had the rate movements, the magnitude movements, like the rate being like a sprint or like a fast line hop, the magnitude
right.
Like a depth drop, and then that
was part of how you could figure out what kind of athlete that you had. Did you have a strength dominant, a power dominant, or a speed dominant athlete? Whatever you're missing, you could build into that realm.
Yeah, and I still think I still use a lot of that when I make a program for somebody. It's incredible. Like the first thing that I think scared people about DB Hammer was his nomenclature of how he talked about things, and everybody's, oh, that's not. But when you look at it, he's 100% correct in terms of how he was describing movement and how there was different aspects of lifting weights and in the contractions and the speed of the contractions. So I think the nomenclature, I think autoregulatory training, and then I think being able to look at an athlete and where they come in on that spectrum, whether they're duration dominant or rate dominant, is a huge part of training. It's enormous. And I don't think people understand the gravity of that. I mean,
and I think part of his pushback was that people didn't want to admit the fact that, all right, my strength training is, I've got a bunch of strength dominant people and I continue to do strength training, which I love to do. This is crap because they're powerful. Well, test them. Well, no, I'm not going to test them. They can jump up onto a box. Until you start timing people, you're not going to see, it depends on what your goal is, but if you're not timing people, the goal, and for us, our goal is to run faster. You can't see if it's working or not. And I think a lot of people don't want to look to see if what they're doing is working. And that was part of the problem with DB Hammer. And I think that was the blowback that he got on super training, the forum back in the day, was that a lot of people were having to face the reality of what their workouts were. And they didn't want to deal with that. They didn't want to acknowledge that. So it's easy to just say, well, he's not even a real person. He doesn't exist. It's really someone else, whoever it was. People said he's this guy, he's that guy. No, he wasn't. If you read his writing, you can tell he was German. His sentence structure was something that was learned. It's not something that he was not. You could tell it wasn't his primary language.
Yeah. That's
the difference between Chris and I. That's an intellectual way to look at it. My thing was, I don't care who he is. I could care less. The information coming across that keyboard is some of the most fascinating stuff I've ever seen in my life. And it had an answer for everything. And he described his answer and why he actually prescribed what he prescribed. Nobody else did that. Nobody.
Yeah. One of the things that sticks with me, and maybe this is a good way just to continue to kind of, for people who are catching up or refresher on the system, is with the three buckets, basically, the magnitude, the rate, and the duration, and like the way that what you should and shouldn't mix. Is the piece that actually still sticks with me. Like basically putting like a duration, like a heavy weight or weightlifting extended duration with something fast, that doesn't really mix very well. Magnitude, plyometrics and speed will work better, or you could do some magnitude and weights more easily. And then there's also like the brackets of work. But for me, that I look at how my workouts are designed now, and a lot of that idea is definitely in there. Ultimately, what do you cook with? And how to simplify that, because I think it's very easy. And we talked about the information overload today. It's very easy to do a workout. It's like, all right, we're going to start with some sprints. We'll do some sprints. Then we're going to do some plyos. Then we'll do some Olympic lifts. Then we'll do some squats. Then we'll do some arms. That's kind of a very typical flow. And obviously, people could still get results doing that for sure. But could you get better results if you had things that maybe cooked a little bit better and more specifically, and you knew what days to put them on? And I think that, to me, that was the piece of the system that's definitely stuck with me and how I still program for sure. I think to me, it's just fascinating how, that first principles definition of those modalities.
Yeah. I think that was the first chapter of his book, if I remember correctly. That's how he opened it up.
Yeah. I got a little ADD because I really focused on that. And then once it got to prime pinnacle and all that stuff, I think I was starting to lose a little bit. So maybe that's why that stuck with me more. I don't know. But I did want to get, I know we talked a lot about drop-offs last time, the last episode. So again, people, if you guys haven't listened to the episode, it was, I believe, in somewhere in the 30s, 32, 36, go check that out. One thing I wanted to get to today that I think is really fascinating, you mentioned Cal and the performance cycling, because I hadn't thought about this, was just the idea of complexes. I really like using sequences of 4 ingredients in a speed day. I tend to use more if it's a speed or a skill type day than I do a strength day. And it seemed like you guys did too. Like a strength thing, you just have maybe a couple in there. But I wanted to ask you about, well, one, do you still see room for any workouts? Like if it was flying 10s, would you ever go out and just do 4 flying 10s or 3 or fly 10s to drop off and that's it, nothing else? Like tell me about maybe that versus complexes, and then the max number of things. Like I saw there were 6 things in some of the workouts. So number of things in a skill, speed, power training session. I'd like to hear your perspective on that and if that's changed for you over time.
For me, I've definitely done just fly 10s, just so kids start to understand maximal velocity in itself, and the timing system teaches them that, and to stay in something to be at top speed, right? We did it today with my football team. We had them out there run fly 10s. There was nothing in the rotation, nothing except fly 10s, but they were all competing against dropping off against themselves, right? So now they're working on that capacity to understand speed. So, and then I've also, when I'm truly training and trying to fix certain things, put something into a circuit style or complex. So it all depends, but I use it all.
Would you say, Oh, sorry, not to just really quickly, just because I had this thought. Would you be more likely to just do that if it's because football practice has a lot of qualities. Like that's almost the complex if in some ways, you know what I'm saying? And then it would make it more easy to be like, all right, well, let's just hit these fly 10s because we're already doing a complex kind of a football. Or any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that's like, talking to the guys in the NFL, that's what they do. They have to make sure that they hit their maximal velocity numbers throughout the course of the week. So the GPS data is telling them, here's where we're at. This is what you need. You need to experience this type of volume. So I believe that, yes, you got to go get this group of guys getting this many runs in at top speed. I get that. I think I use it differently. I use it just to teach kids what maximal velocity is and being able to hit a run and go, oh my God, that was my fastest ever. I wasn't even trying. And understanding the key from relaxation to pressing something to all the little intricacies of running fast. I think it's a great teaching tool.
Yeah, I usually start my season with just 5/10s. Again, like Dan said, it's a great way to get someone or teach someone to run fast. But you can use the complexes as fatigue method, where you're going to take them through that cycle, of course, and then they're not going to run as well, and they've got to really start to push that system faster with the fatigue to whatever you're trying to hit. You can use it as a form changer. So a lot of times, if you have something that I don't like in your form or something doesn't look right, your exercises are going to be to try to change, strengthen whatever I'm trying to get you to strengthen. So eventually running faster, but it's also a great way to change the input into the system. Dan talks about that a lot, where have you changed the input into the system? And the complexes are one way to do that. So your second fly or your third fly is going to be completely different because certain things are fatigued. I remember one time, I think Franz Bosch talked about, if you stand there and you do a set of curls, a set of 20 on a one arm dumbbell curl, you're changing the input into the system on your next fly 10. So I try to manipulate those complexes depending on what each kid needs. So a kid who needs more volume and needs to work on his endurance a little bit, his complex is going to be longer. Whereas a kid who's kind of primed up, maybe he's not going to have as many things in his complex.
Today's podcast is sponsored by Lila Exogen Wearable Resistance. Exogen is used by coaches such as Randy Huntington and Chris Korfist and is an incredible tool in overloading the angular momentum and speed aspect of human movement. You can get 25% off of Exogen sleeves by heading to lilateam.com and using the code JustFly25. Just real quick with that one too, not to get too off topic, but that's something that has been interesting to me lately. And maybe partially just because I look back on my own training when I used to play basketball and was in many ways more athletic than once I started to really narrow down into more, you could say, low volume, true speed training. Like I was someone who needed more volume, not like endurance, like necessarily, but like explosive volume, like a lot of it. Is there any thoughts on how because you mentioned like with the DB system determining who needs what, any thoughts on that? I know like muscular and elastic is a big topic. I've had a lot of podcasts with those types of ideas. Thoughts on that, determining who needs how much? I'm sure, with drop-offs being helpful, but any other thoughts?
Yeah, I think that's what the auto-reg system set up, is it tells you how much your nervous system is ready to deal with. And if you want to increase that ability, or you want to increase your ability to do more, then you just change your drop-off. Or you can add exercises in between to create more volume for what you're going to do. Because I think whatever you're measuring is what people are going to give 100% on. So you can kind of feed things into that one thing that you're measuring, or the two things that you're measuring, and try to manipulate the input based on that.
Yeah, and I think a lot for me is when we are just doing these fly 10s or something like that, and you get a kid who is, let's say, he's a middle distance runner, and they would come over and they can run 20 fly 10s, and they're decent speed, and then all of a sudden they hit one on their 21st one. I call it like hit the speed barrier or the speed breakthrough, where they went, oh wow, that's what full speed.
There's fifth gear.
Like. Yeah. And then they go, wait a minute, that's what he's talking about. So now I want to start manipulating that number as opposed to the numbers before that, which were just mid-range numbers that they were stuck in. So you actually jolted their nervous system, but it took 20 runs to get there. So that's where I think the timing system becomes this teaching tool. It's almost like a tactile sensation, but it's more of it's instant. I know what I'm doing. I see it. And that's why I don't understand people who don't have timing systems.
Yeah.
I don't have the best timing system, but I have to have something that's I know that was an improvement or that was way worse. Because looking at somebody and going, well, that was my full speed. It happens with my son all the time. Well, I was running fast. No, you weren't.
No, you weren't.
No, you weren't. You have no idea what fast is. And then he gets on that beam and he goes, oh, I got it.
Yeah, it's I don't think it was Franz Bosch's research. He's highlighted it. I always look for this study and I can never find it. But it's when he highlights with knowledge of like technique or something, technical feedback versus knowledge of result. It was with discus throwers. Like half of them got like technical feedback from an experienced coach. And these were, I think, semi-experienced throwers. And
they measure.
Yeah, the other half, hey, just how far did you throw? That's it. And I think it was the group that had the coach did better initially, but then the group that had the result eventually eclipsed them because they kind of learned, like back to what we were talking about in the beginning, they were forced to learn themselves what feels good, what doesn't. But they also had the distance. If you didn't have the distance, that would be a third group that you don't get coaching and you don't know how far you throw. It'd be interesting just for the sake of a third group. I'd probably be a frustrated group, but
and you can use measurement for all those different Franz Bosch, DB Hammer things. Like I have the 1080 synchro now, and oscillatory isometrics are always a thing that are kind of hard to describe to people. They're kind of hard to coach. But I've created a setting on the synchro where you've got to relax and then contract again, like an oscillatory isometric, but you can read the graph and you can see when they relax, just how much more eccentric action there is when they learn to relax that movement and then reverse it and come back again. And then actually by getting that feedback, they learn, so this is how you do it. And this, wow, look at my numbers go up when I do it properly. So again, that feedback, that they can see numbers and graphs jump and all that stuff, it's a huge impact on teaching. And then you can get that extra, that pop that you're looking for with that feedback.
And then when you see it, then you start to be able to feel it.
Yes.
And when you can feel it, then you can change it. And that's the process that needs to happen. It's almost like, and again, you go back 20 years, DB Hammer was talking about the U-shaped virus, where there's this pause that you want it to be more like a V. And I got to sometimes give somebody the virus to get rid of the virus. It's just crazy that dude knew what he was talking about before there were synchros, before there was all that stuff. And now Chris gets to prove it. And Joel, that's what we're talking about. There's the dots. They just got connected. You know what I mean? And that's what the great minds along the way is just what's happening now. People are connecting dots, performance dots.
Yeah, I like just things like you mentioned, even with the oscillatory isometrics, it's not something a coach can tell you, all right, do this, do this, do this. It's something you actually learn by feeling it. And there's such a value.
You can't go on YouTube and go, here's the YouTube, which by the way, Joel, I still use your oscillatory isometric split squat to show people how to do it. Because that's the best thing out there. But you got to feel it. You've got to feel that fall. You've got to feel that relaxation. And then if you can quantify that relaxation, like Dan said, so this is how it feels. Now I can do this much better.
Yeah, I think if I had one superpower, it'd be that whatever that feeling was. Well, even that, like I learned it by myself. I watched all the old DB Hammer the videos on the InnoSport website, and I was like, okay, I think this is, and even the description of the book, it's like max contraction, then max relaxation and bounce out. And I don't know, it's like something I never had a coach like telling me that, but it's interesting how, figuring that out.
When you do it right, there's this bounce with weight that you've never seen before. It's unbelievable. And it's based off of how you relaxed in that abbreviated range of motion. And until you feel it, and then in Chris's case, until you see it, you're not gonna get there. I think oscillating isometrics may be one of the most profound training techniques out there. I really do. In terms of teaching what movement really is and how to
Drake was,
yeah.
he was the first one that, named it, explained it. And it works really well. But like I said, it's hard to coach. But now that you can quantify it and you can show someone on a graph, see what happens when you relax all the way. Look at how your body just snaps back naturally. And I do it with a hamstring exercise. I don't do it with a split squat.
How do you do it? What hamstring exercise do you use for that?
So you got to have a synchro or a sprint. So you're laying on your back and your leg is up. And so then I'll create the setting that it's going to pull back. So you've got to put like a force against it. And then when you hit a certain point, it will snap your leg back. So you're going to press down. And as soon as you take your pressure off the cuff, it comes back, 8 meters a second. And you relax. And then your hamstring actually brings you right back to that point. And your power jumps up maybe 30% when you relax more, which is what we want to do with a hamstring.
Yeah, it's so counterintuitive to, I think a lot of athletes are wired, not all, but a lot are like, it's almost like everything's very willful or position. Do this, put limb here. Like even the way you watch kids do sprint drills and stuff, it's like put limb here and not, hey, let my body operate elastically and with that energy I already have. I wanted to ask you guys, I wanted to go back to actually what you said about the fly tens. I was actually just writing about this the other day, but like, would you say the idea of almost, and even just the art of progression, like starting with something that's simple, how much can we get from something simple? Like how many gains can we get from just doing fly tens? And now we ran out. Now let's make it a complex. Now let's put more pieces in. Like assuming that's how it would tend to build, but I'm kind of curious more of your thoughts on that idea.
In terms of changing just a fly 10?
Yeah, like going from all right, we'll starting from just fly 10s. So let's do your three or four drop off, and like kind of going from what is it, blocked to not random, but blocked to or not. It's basically going serial to like complex or whatnot. But going from
well, for me, it's changed more to I give a different sensory input and see how that makes the next fly 10 worse or better. And, and then I start to take notes on that and say, okay, these types of sensory input the brain is looking for to create more safety, to ultimately create more speed. These things are threats. We don't want to do that. So you start to build your toolbox of sensory inputs that are going to help you perform at a high level. And that's what we do. Like today, I was out there with a kid and we were working on vestibular activations, and whether we were utricosacral, whatever it might be, horizontal canal. And one of those was a profound effect. And we were in the point where he's going to start to fatigue. He was on his 10th, fly, right? And he hit his best. And I'm like, okay, put that one in the tool bag because you can use that. And once you can start to set a new standard and become accustomed to that, then it becomes your new normal, right? And that's what we're all looking for. You got to create new normals all the time.
Yeah, I kind of do the same thing with overspeed. Again, there's a fear factor there that you're going to go faster than you thought. And once you get that down, there's they're not new harnesses, but I think Cairo, forgot the name of the company. I can send it to you. But it's a really tight fitting vest that have O-rings all over. So I can attach the O-rings to different parts of your body so you get a different input as to where you're getting pulled from. And now your body has to adjust. My favorite is I'm attaching it right at your sternum, above your sternum. And with overspeed, that's great because a lot of times when you pull people from the waist, they're going to stand straight up. But when you're getting pulled from the sternum, you really have to turn your legs over faster, and it's going to change how your foot cycles through. And I've really gotten a lot of bang for a buck on that. So that changes your input. And then you're going to take your 7-minute rest and go over run a fly 10. Or for us at home at Foster, we have 2 sprints now. So someone will go down, up. You're not going to tow much, I'm going to tow you, or I'm going to tow you from your, you get pulled, and then you're going to get your 7-minute rest, and then you're going to do a resisted run. And again, I can attach different places. If you really want to mess with someone, you're going to attach it in the front when they pull away, because now your whole torso has to strain a lot harder to keep things straight. It's going to change your foot pattern. Again, it's not much. I'm going to use the drop-offs and apply the tension based on, can I make you stay within a 5% or 10% range of your fastest time. So yeah, that's how I'm using the 1080 in a DB hammer world.
It seems like both of you, in your own unique way, kind of went from, and correct me if I'm wrong, but almost from, well, here's the exercises or the complex, to more, I want to see what each thing does. I want to see how X impacts Y, versus instead of just dropping off, you're trying to find more of the correlations within the complex. But Dan, you more from the nervous, and Chris more from the technical and learning piece.
I think when you look at the whole DB Hammer emails, he gave workouts every week, and they changed every week. And I think that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to put inputs in to see what kind of changes we can make. And everyone's individual. But I think that's what we're ultimately trying to do, challenge the nervous system to go faster, and then give it a chance to go faster.
And I think that when you impact neurology the way we're starting to do it now, you realize that some of these changes can happen way faster than we think they can.
Yeah.
Because we become accustomed to seeing the same numbers over and over and over. And that if you periodize this is the progression you're going to have, and then you're going to end up here. Well, wonderful. Well, how come I just did a vestibular activation and I ended up at the end of the cycle of what they were supposed to run just on the 10th one? So that's what intrigues me about what's left out there, is we're still not shaking the cage enough to rattle what's in there. I mean, there's a lot left. And I think these sensory inputs are now where, I think the training part of it, everybody's just about got it. There's some people, and Chris is doing it probably a lot better than a lot of people, but when you want bang for your buck, when you start impacting your brain, it's interesting.
Yeah.
Even stuff like, I do overspeed drills just because I want to see what the rest of your body does. And it's amazing how people's body respond when you do a drill that's faster. Like today, I had a kid whose arms, he locked his elbows immediately. As soon as we started, we're just doing stiff leg runs, and he's getting pulled. And he went into a fear mode. Boom, arms went straight. And I said, all right, here's a ball. While I'm pulling you down the street, you're going to pass the ball around your waist. That way you can't bend. And that way his body had to learn. So then third time through, it's like, yeah, this is really easy now. So instantly I made an impact, because his brain had to do something else, separate his upper and lower body. And his brain said, yeah, this is safe. We can do this now. You don't have to go concussion, straight arm mode. Go ahead and run.
Yeah, I tell you, one of the things that is more true to me the longer I've been coaching is cutting through layers of fear, either from something that's just raw output or even technical. Like you mentioned, Chris, like the straight arm. I see a lot, even when I'll give a new constraint in high jump or curve running. Athletes who their mind, or they have cognitive overload, they kind of hold their arms fixed, like up
or
high.
They go into finger positions. Their fingers look like squid. Cuttlefish, and they're doing like weird things with your hands. Instantly, when you see that, they got to pass the ball, or take like one of those pinch balls. What do you call those pinchy balls, Dan, that have the spikes?
Neuro spike ball.
Yeah, have them pass that hand to hand, so you're completely deadening what's going on in their upper body, so their lower body can kind of just take that on, and you can separate.
I think of it a little bit like, and I'll take any feedback on this idea, but like the homunculus, man, where, there's so many nerve endings in our hands, and even putting your hand somewhere on your body, you get more sensation there. But the idea of almost trying to use more of the human with what we're doing, because human beings are upright and rotational, and we have a little bit, the white matter, gray matter versus animals. But like, if we have all this sensation, maybe we should use it, like grabbing a ball and taking it in circles. Like, it's is going to activate more of our machinery versus, I guess, it's like, well, if we have it, might as well use it, And I think there's a reason, like, doing dunks or playing basketball is so, fires people up so much. And I think I've mentioned that on this podcast a million times, but I love that idea with just even something as simple as the ball. I've seen like the figure 8 drill with the ball too, and things like that. It's
yeah, and that's part of the whole layering that we created. The different layers that your brain can go, because the next layer after that is, can you scan while you're running full speed? I think Dan talks about that. I always forget how to say it. He'll correct me. Saccades.
You have saccadic.
Saccadic. That's it. Saccadic. I do that just to piss him off. So switch your eyes left and right when you're doing the infinity runs or sprinting. Do math while you're sprinting. Cal does that really well. They'll put math equations up on a PowerPoint slide as you're doing your goat drills and you're doing your overspeed stuff. So you're really separating that higher order thinking, so your lower body just accepts that new speed that you're at. But when you have 8 million helpers, or what does Cal call them? All those people, his minions, you can get away with doing all those different things. When it's just you don't have time to set up a projector and put PowerPoint slides of math equations up and different colors flashing and things like that.
And again, it's just change the stimulus and see what happens. The other day we had a kid. All right, so you're doing your fly 10. On the way back, take off your shoe of the longer leg and walk back. Huh? Yeah, take the shoe off, walk back. So now it's even. It's not, you don't have a longer leg. Now it's even. Does your brain like that? Runs the next one. Whoa. Okay. Or we've done that before. Kid runs way worse. And then you just start to play around with the input. And if these inputs have that dramatic of a result, positively or negatively, you can then create these windows. And then these windows become doors. And then all of a sudden, instead of a biomechanical breakthrough, which are hard to come by, you get these neurological breakthroughs, which, when you're talking about limiting threat, think about the arms, like in this position. Total fear response.
That's a terrified position. That's, oh my God, I just got brain trauma.
And we're going to get a guy who's got a stopwatch around him at the track meet going, you have to bend your arms and do this. Not when you're scared as hell. That ain't happen. So it has to be neurological. It has to be. And you have to figure out ways to reduce that threat. And it goes back to the old Jay Schroeder quote. You're never going to jump 40 inches in the air unless your body and brain believes it can land safely from 40 inches in the air. And that makes more sense than any statement I've heard in strength and conditioning or speed training. You have to, and you're falling out of the air when you're running. So you better be really sure that your body can brace for that impact.
Yeah. Having children too, watching them even do something like climbing trees or playing on the playground, but you see it a lot climbing trees, like the kids who will just climb right up to the top and or be jumping off the branches, and like they're like almost just cutting through those layers of fear, and you could see how it will serve them in just even general tasks later, or even just, it makes me respect just parkour athletes, and like you kind of have to get to a threshold for various jumps. There's like safety layers that you have to deal with and understand, or even things where the body's being flipped in there, like even a cartwheel. I used to take that kind of for granted a little bit, but there's a lot of safety layering and processing that even goes into something as basic as a cartwheel.
I know. Then Chris and I have talked about it in our older videos about just hanging from something, right? So the primitive reflexes in your hand, the co-contractions in your spine, I'm teaching mental toughness. Don't let go of that bar. Figure out how to stay up there. Shoulder health. One simple, stupid exercise that has a huge impact on everything.
I still think the best upper body training is monkey bars. And even then, you see people go up on the monkey bar. I have monkey bars in my basement. So, when people do it, they're driving with their arms, but they lose the cross crawl pattern when they're doing it. So you see their whole torso and hips move together, where someone really athletic, when they go through the monkey bars, their left arm is coming forward, their right leg is coming forward when they're going through, where you're less effective efficient athlete, you see the whole body move back and forth. They haven't learned to separate and use that cross crawl pattern whenever they can. And again, the more we can get into those reflexes, again, which is kind of why I like getting pulled from your neck rather than your waist, it really brings in those, you get more bang for your buck once you bring reflexes into your training.
I had a funny thought of like a fear response with overspeed is if you had a little like neck training harness, the top of the forehead, they get pulled from the forehead or something like that. I wonder what response that would, probably not optimal for biomechanics, but
now I'm going to go out and try it.
Yeah. Yeah. Please take a video.
Well, our vestibular system is designed so this noggin doesn't hit the floor. So if you want to stimulate it, mess with that thing.
Yeah. What in the midst of like experimentation, like once it comes time to like I guess you could say stabilize or peak, like you're getting close to the state championship. What are your thoughts on taking what you found or that process of experimenting and then kind of packaging it in a way that prepares an athlete for that final off ramp or ramp into the championship? So basically working from an exploration into something that's a little more consistent. I'd be curious, like with the complexes or going more serial in nature. Any thoughts with that?
Well, I think over time you're going to, mid-season you have a big complex. Hopefully by the end of the season, whatever you've built or whatever you wanted to change is changed, and if not, you're going to have the athlete that you've got 4 weeks out, and you need to come up with things. All right, so this is the best I'm going to get out of this kid, and this might be his compensation pattern. How am I going to get something out of him in the next 2.5 weeks using what we have built up to this point? So it will change. That the exercises might change, knowing that, all right, so this foot's always going to hit here. I haven't made that change. I now need a drill that I'm going to get more power. I'm going to armor up the compensation so I can get whatever I can out of the recognizing compensation or the gate that we've changed.
Yeah. So basically just whatever the athlete is, like digging in. I mean, I don't know if that's a good term, but like working with that. All right, here's where we are. Let's work with that for the remainder of the season. And stabilize.
Armor up the compensation pattern.
And I think the more you get, like I said, you create these toolboxes of sensory inputs that are going to facilitate better movement and cleaner movement. I want an athlete that, let's say you run a 4.340 and you've run it once in your life. That's not going to help us if we're trying to run on a track meet. I want the guy who I shake him in the middle of the night, get him up, he runs downstairs and he's running 4.3 because it's something that he just does. Mm-hmm. He's not afraid to be that fast anymore. Yeah. So instead of periodizing it to that one time that you're going to have once in your life, I want it to just be normal. So I know what you're running when you're going to run it,
Yeah. Yeah. That's like an animal, like an animal in the wild. It's you have to always be ready. I think I find there is that thing. Sometimes you almost can get so carried away with the complex or all the nuances and all the little things. You forget that, well, hey, today, maybe let's just do like a 5-minute warm up and just start blasting some sprints. And can you do it? You should be able to do this. And so there's definitely something to that, like almost like
I think, and that's where your culture comes in. How competitive are your practices? And you start posting numbers and people want to beat other people. And sometimes you say, you know what, this is going really well. Let's keep it rolling. We were putting our 1080 numbers up on a projector so everyone could see. We tied our timer up to a projector. So as soon as you came across that fly 10, your number came up right in front of your face. So we're getting that instantaneous feedback. And so sometimes practice ended up not as you planned because what your goal is, which is running faster, kind of took over for the complexes. And the kids were like, well, coach, if I go through the cycle again, I can't beat so-and-so. It's all right. So then don't do that. Wait around, wait till you feel good, and then go see if you can beat so-and-so. So all of a sudden your culture or your practice takes over for your neurologic input. And that's ultimately what we want too. The bigger the stage, the more I want you to step up to it.
Today's podcast is sponsored by my favorite jump testing and training device, the Plyomat. If you want a jump mat that can not only get standard counter movement jumps and reactive jumps, but also is something you can put into your standard plyometric training, such as hurdle hops and bounds, to gather not only height, but reactive strength, contact time, and add that extra dynamic to your total training session, then check out the Plyomat, and you can head to plyomat.net, that's Plyomat.net, to learn more. Today's podcast is also sponsored by Gym Studio. Gym Studio is a new frictionless gym and studio management software. It's designed with a balance of powerful yet no-nonsense features. Gym Studio can effortlessly manage memberships, schedule classes, track attendance, and even automate billing. You can head to gymstudio.com and set up your free 14-day trial in less than 5 minutes. Yeah, I think culture and belief ultimately should kind of trump, in how we're wired. I think we maybe forget that, like, the culture and belief ultimately should be the trump card on the workout in so many ways. Like, all right, here it is. Can you just go do this? I mean, it's because that's the competition at the end of the day.
Yeah. And that instant feedback is so important. If you've got a digital timer, that's great, but it's even better when you can put that time up. And as soon as they come through, they see that time. So they know instantly, was that a fast one or was that a slow one? What did I do different? And you know where you're ranked.
Yeah. I did want to ask, it's funny, these are always the best conversations when I think we've gotten through 3 of the questions of my, I wrote like 10. I did want to ask this, along with and I know this stuff is in like a lot of the speed complexes, like the little fast line hops, single leg line hops, like the 30-second single leg line hop. That's always, that's been such a perennial thing for me. I've been thinking a little bit of the speed ladder lately under the line of, well, it's just funny because people hate on the speed ladder, but then in the old, sport DB stuff, there was all the quadrant hops. Is it really that different? You could put a speed ladder on the ground and now it can be that, I was just curious what you guys' take were, or maybe how your thoughts have evolved with some of that like fast quadrant work. I was even reading the old DB emails, and he was speaking of different sequences with different quadrant sequences and things for time and speed. Just curious where that has gone over the years.
So for me, I can't speak for Chris. I do believe that there is a fundamental quality of neural rate that you have to teach the body how to relax, to move fast, like a tap dancer. But I think the difference with people who do these agility ladders is you have to understand that that's one component of what makes somebody fast, correct? Right. So if you're using it and you have that answer, I'm okay with that. Then you take a look at Tony Villani and how he uses the speed ladder. I'm okay with that. He uses it to teach that plant, break, separate, all that. That's okay. I have no problem with that either. But for me, I go even further back and say you can make that oscillatory in nature to start to teach from the inside out how to do those things and relax, right? So I do think that the ladders have merit, not for what the normal speed coach would say, this is why I use them. But I don't combine them. Like I'm a fly 10, wickets, calf pops, split jumps type of guy in a rotation. Love that. But yeah, the speed ladders do get a lot of raps, but for good reasons, because there's a bunch of goofballs doing things on it that,
it becomes an end to itself.
Yeah. Understand that that's one component of speed.
I think one of the best drills out of the whole DB hammer thing was the single leg box jump. There's a box, you face the wall, and you actually jump backwards down off the box and jump back up as fast as you can. And then over time, you gradually, by inches, increase the height of the box. And all right, we're doing this for 30 seconds or whatever. You're going to get 20 reps in 30 seconds. And if I increase that box and I've got to reach a little bit higher and bounce up, I'm creating more force on the ground in the same amount of time. And that's actually what we want to do when we sprint, is how fast can you create force into the ground. I think that's one of the best exercises out of the whole DB hammer world. And we do that religiously. And we'll go for 30 seconds. We'll go for 60 seconds. And we'll still do line hops. Beginning of the year, we'll do line hops. I love line hops. I think that the greatest tragedy out there is you don't see offensive and defensive linemen doing line hops. You can go to any high school camp and take one of their big guys and say, can you hop side to side over a line for 30 seconds? You'd be amazed at the number of guys that can't. And then the coaches complain like, well, our bigs got to move a little bit faster. Their feet don't move very well, but we're going to go back and we're going to go do some cleans. Say, come on, come on, let's go. But yeah, the box jump, the single leg box jump, I think is king of exercise for max velocity.
Yeah, that it reminds me, Chris, of that a little bit. Well, at least with what you're talking about, the single leg, you had line hop with that. I think we were talking about Irish dance on one podcast.
Oh yeah,
and it's not. I mean, it is kind of funny, because like you said, Dan, and like the speed ladder could be an end unto itself. Irish dance could be an end unto itself. But when you combine these things and the qualities and the rhythm and relaxation, the firing rates of these things together, I think too, I don't know, I'm sure maybe there's like a cultural, maybe there's more athletic movements. There's a lot of hip flexors too in the Irish dance that comes up. And I remember I watched that football player and he was extremely quick and reactive on the field, but I think he fumbled a lot. So, what are you going to do? But I mean, you could kind of, I don't know. It is like the speed ladder gets knocked because it's not far enough apart. But with that guy's movements on the field, you could see a little bit of that dance reactivity present, and he was able to create separation. I think he just struggled holding onto the ball. So
the best athletes that I get in the middle school age group, grades 5 through 8, male or female, are always the girls who did ballet and Irish dance. They require the least amount of correction in movement of all the kids. And so when these parents show up with their kids and say, well, how can we make Johnny faster or Stevie faster or whatever? I say, well, if he's got the courage, he should go do Irish dancing for 6 weeks or go do ballet for 6 weeks. Or if he doesn't want to do that, instead of paying me, I would hire someone privately to come over and do the dance drills and do the ballet drills, because that's really where you're going to get the most bang for your buck.
Yeah, even I think after that podcast we did, Chris, I was looking up Irish dance for my daughter, who was I think 5 or 6 at the time, or I wasn't sure. I guess it gets really intense. Oh,
there's world championship.
Yeah.
And Chicago's the home for it because this is where all the Irish people live.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be cool to even just to watch something like that, the athleticism that comes out of it. So moving through, I just try to get to at least some of these questions to kind of put a little bit of a container in what we've talked about. But I know both of you have used the water bags and those ideas. And I think that's something where people probably have some mixed opinions. I think when they first came out, especially in the Netherlands, they're almost so ubiquitous over there. If it becomes so trendy, it's almost uncool at some point. And then you see all the different movements. But I've become a bigger fan every year of the water bag. And maybe it's, every time I talk to you, Chris, you might say something about it. And finally, I think I've finally come around to using it a substantial amount more. And I'd just be curious how you two have evolved that progression over time. And I guess the last thing I'll say is that to me, it does speak to the nuance of as we've talked about, the training has gotten more nuanced, the way that you'd find the individual factor becomes more nuanced for the athlete. And the effect of a water bag is a little bit more nuanced. It's not put your hand here, do this series. There's a certain, I guess you could say there's a certain relationship you have to it and how your body's picking up technique. So anyways, I'm kind of rambling. I'd love to hear more about how you guys have taken that on over time.
Dan's going to talk.
Yeah, I'm big. I'm not just with the water bags. I'm big on the part where Franz Bosch talks about coordination. Sprinting, yes, we know strength and we know power and we know magnitude, all these things, but there is a coordination factor in there, and a timing factor, and a rhythm factor. These things matter. You can practice those things. And those water bags are a great way to create those co-contractions, create that coordinated piece. And then he talks about targets and being able to hit targets in practice. I'm a big believer in that. Again, you have to be able to connect all these dots and put it all together, but that's a piece of it for sure.
Yeah, and I think it's more neural input that your spine, it's not so much that your hamstring or your big muscles that everyone likes to train are involved. It's more what your spine does when there's all these perturbations. Another word I say wrong all the time just to piss Dan off. And that's what we want to do. The longer I'm doing this, the more I'm realizing it's coming down to your spine. It's coming down to your ability to connect your hips with your rib cage. Because I get people that do big numbers on different things, and they're not that, they're not running fast, but the things that are happening, proximally, that's where I think it's starting to become more and more. I watched that sprint documentary on Netflix, and I think you see that when these athletes are walking around, just how perfect the center part of their body moves every time. And the timing is there, the power is there, the force is there, the speed is there. And again, if that's off, everything else is going to be off.
Yeah, the more I watch elite athletes, that tends to be the thing that I see. Like, I guess they have those things, like if you're reading a website, where do your eyes go on the page? Like the marketing people use that. And it'd be interesting in coaching to look at the same thing. What are you watching? For me, that is more and more the thing I look at is like, what is the rib cage doing? And how is the timing? What's the timing of the limbs like? Not even necessarily the positions or precise positions. The first thing is how good of timing does this athlete have? And yeah, to what you said, Dan, timing, rhythm, coordination, that certainly has become continually more valuable over time because you start to see athletes who have it and those who, even if it's just off just a little bit, it has pretty substantial waves that happen downstream.
Yeah. And then you go to my Louis Simmons story of sometimes when you do these bilateral movements, it crushes your ability to cross crawl, rhythmic movement, because that's not what you were doing to begin with. You know what I mean? So it becomes counterproductive. And then, that's where weightlifting is going to stop that coordination. So there's a lot behind it.
Yeah. So the last, maybe I'll finish with this because I did want to go back. I was just looking at these how to get fast complexes. I love going through this. Like it gave me a lot of ideas. And sometimes it's just so good to go through these things. From I guess for you guys, it's what 15 years now in the past.
The timing of that thing when Dan was training Vika, it just worked out that she was there to film all these different things, and to have a world-class athlete film everything was very helpful as well. And then for me and Dan to try to sell these things, because again, it's early in the internet. Dan and I would go to conferences and clinics, and we'd have a booth, and we'd stand there and try to sell DVDs to people at, all over the place. And so we would go to Washington, D.C. or Boston, or whatever, and hang out for 3 or 4 days and try to sell DVDs, always thinking that we were going to get rich.
Yes. The only thing that ended up happening was I fell down your stairs. You remember that? I did. I fell all the way down your stairs.
Like the Eddie Murphy, Aunt Bunny's falling down the stairs. She's still falling down the stairs. Oh, what about Jesus? I'm almost there. I'm halfway.
I'm falling down the goddamn stairs. I'm still.
That's what it was like, Dan going down our stairs in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
Is he down yet? Boom, boom, boom. Oh, no. Boom, 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 boom. Halfway. My foot's stuck in the railing.
Yeah, I was gonna say with one of those, I think I read off the exercises, but like with 6 components, something like, and you mentioned, Chris, you might just be measuring a couple of them, like specifically for time or drop offs. But like one was, I think I read it before, like 1 squat drops 3 reps, 2 split squat drops 3 reps, 3 stiff leg drops 3 reps, then fly 10s, prime times, line hops for 30 seconds. And do you guys still run ones that have that many components, or have you kind of tightened those up over time? Or like, because I'm just curious, because I really enjoy ones that do have like a few more, like running 3 or 4. 4 is a common one. I haven't done 6 though. I haven't stretched it to that, but I was just curious if you guys have still
If
still
you're
use
training
those
here
types of things?
one-on-one, or if I have one or two people here, I'll have a six stations because I can go through and do that. But with my track team, I try to keep it at 4 so I can have quadrants all over the track, and so I can look and see. Thank God I have phenomenal managers at home at Flossmore where they run the 1080 and they know how to do all the settings. They do everything. So that's one less station I have to be at. I usually position myself at the station where they're going to work the least hard, like the easiest thing to blow off. And then I'll find a way to time that or monitor that and post data on that. So at track practice, I'll have 3 or 4.
Gotcha. Dan, how about you?
Chris is big time. He's got all these people helping him. I for the sake of how we started training indoors in New York, we have 4 hallways, right, in the school. So that's how we would set up our stations sometimes. But then there's times where I just want to run wickets and then a fly 10. And I want you to be able to feel what a wicket feels like going over it and then put that together into a fly 10 and try to connect those dots. So yeah, it changes. I'll do 2, I'll do 4 or 5. So I still use all of that stuff. But it really depends on what the training week looks like and how we're doing it.
Yeah, sounds good. And I was looking at some of the ones too, like the there was one that looked kind of gnarly. It was like isometric squat, isometric ham, some iso glute ham, 7 seconds to drop the superset till you drop off. Like some of those probably got pretty gnarly over time. Was there any memorable like strength supersets you guys used to link together?
I tell you what, those strength ones are great. The isometric bench press, 1 inch off your chest for 6 seconds. I used to use that one a ton. I got a couple athletes that are here right now that are like just shaking their heads like this. So that you talk about getting strong, those complexes for getting strong fast, were unbelievable.
Yeah, those are unbelievable.
Yeah.
So usually
there's one I still use now, with dumbbells, with supine raises that I sell as a bench press protocol because it's unbelievable because you get that 4 days rest and come back and bench press, you're better. 100% you're better.
What is that combo?
I'm not going to tell you. No, I'm kidding. We go supine raises. We go isodynamic front raise with the bar. So it's a bench. It's the bar with a bench press grip. 4-second pause at the top. Tap your thighs, bring it right back up. If you're a 300-pound bencher, you probably get about 13 to 14 repetitions with that 4-second pause. And then you rotate to supine raises. Then you do an isometric dip. And then the last one was iso subscap pull down, right? Rotate those around, drop it off to something. And all of a sudden, 4 days later, your bench press is better.
Dan's got really good bench press workouts. Dan trained the guy who set the record for 225, or he held the record for a short period of time, 225 for NFL.
It's all mythical.
No, come on. How many times did he do it?
I can tell you this. We had a kid, and I'll tell you his name. He actually worked in my gym for a while, Chris Amico. My first time it wasn't his first time, but I was speaking at a clinic, all these strength coaches, and I brought him in, and I had everybody set up plyometric boxes and then 2 1/4 on the bench press. So at the time, Dorsey had the record for D lineman in the NFL draft from LSU. So I asked all those guys, what's the record? He said, I don't quote me on the number. They said 43 or 44. All right. So while I'm talking, I have Chris, the guy who's going to do it, go over, hold a plyo push-up, iso push-up for 4 minutes. 4 minutes, no break, 4 minutes. He gets up, I'm still talking, shakes his arms out, goes over to 2 1/4, and I go, okay, now I want you guys to all count out loud. And he banged out like 47 reps after he held it for 4 minutes. That's when everybody was like, oh my God. And I'm like, my thought is getting strong is easy. Now, getting him fast, that's a challenge. So that's where DB Hammer had the market corner. Even Jay Schroeder, getting strong is easy. Now you got to
Yeah.
add the coordinated piece to make it fast. And
You've got to be able to apply that very quickly. And a lot of times today, I think people don't make that transition from how fast can you apply that strength.
Yeah. Would you say that like it's almost as if like a high rep, like shoulder, like you mentioned, like the front raise type stimulus or iso dip? I guess if it was straight arm, it'd be like a straight arm versus bent, but like high rep shoulders is almost kind of like high rep calves or foot, high rep foot for speed. It's almost like a high rep stabilizers, low volume for prime movers, like kind of thing. Would you agree there's maybe a similarity there with bench versus like a speed thing with the foot?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think you can draw that. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just finding it interesting because I think it's just digging into like the Jay Schrader or DB Hammer type thing. I remember the first time, I think it was Alex Lee who's been on this podcast. He had me, and I think it was one of Jay's things. It was like I do a 1-arm bench press, hold it with the bar, balancing it, take like 10 nose breaths. So however long that takes, then you bench it, then you do 10 more nose breaths, however long. And you're sitting there for like 3, 4, 5 minutes on one set with that thing. But the amount of stimulus you get to a lot of those smaller muscles, the stabilizer patterns, is so far beyond any 3 sets of 10 or anything else you do. It's just crazy.
And it goes back to position, right? So for Jay, it was always coaching position and do whatever you can do to not get out of position. Goes back to Steve Davidson with the inertial machine. Get into position. When you fatigue, get into better position, right? So now the brain's like, okay, as I fatigue, position matters. I don't know. There's so many ways to connect these dots. That's the cool thing about it. And for us, unfortunately, for Chris and I, we're older now, and we've been able to see all these things evolve, and it's pretty cool.
I love it. Well, hey, I think that's a good note to finish the podcast on. I had 5 more questions, but that's okay. some other day. But totally appreciate you guys' time. It's just so much fun talking to you too as well. All the stories you guys have, knowledge from training over the years, have you evolved the systems, and I love it. So thank you guys so much. I really appreciate it.
You bet.
Thanks for doing the show.
Yeah.
Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the podcast. I appreciate you listening, and I'll see you next week.